Welcome to our fourth Lunch and Learn session of 2026, presented by Amerly, Idaho, with funding from the Idaho's ISRP grant, Idaho State. I don't know. We get funding to provide these opportunities. This six-part series focuses on strengthening and sustaining the infant and early childhood workforce through relationships, reflective practice, and emotional well-being. I would, for a moment here, well, no, I'm not going to do this. It says I'm supposed to recognize the board members, and I am the only board member. No, I'm not. I'm not. Okay. So Amerly, Idaho folks, wave your hands. We have Jane Zink, who's a board member for Amerly, Idaho, and Jessica Rodriguez, who is our administrative assistant, who helps me because she does a much better job of keeping me on track than I do myself. I'm the board president, and I see I didn't put my name in here. I'm Kristen McKee. I'll change that once our speaker starts presenting. Okay, let's see. Because we only have an hour, I invite you to put your name and so put your name in there where you're located. And how about if you share an object or something that's nearby you that brings you comfort and support? Oh my gosh. We'll do that because about half the people are offline. So let's go ahead and just write it in the chat if you know how to do that. So your name, where you're located, and what is bringing you comfort in your wherever you are today. And while you're doing that, I will introduce today's session, Infant Mental Health in the Classroom, Supporting Early Childhood Educators, explores how an infant mental health lens can strengthen early learning settings by highlighting the role of relationships, emotional attunement, and co-regulation in supporting both child outcomes and educator well-being. We'll explore how infant mental health principles show up in everyday classroom moments and why supporting educators is essential to supporting children. And again, we're excited to welcome Denise McDrummond, Executive Director of the Missouri Association for Infant and Early Childhood Mental Health. Denise brings more than 20 years of experience in early childhood education and infant mental health, with a focus on reflective practice, relationship-based approaches, and supporting the early childhood workforce. Thank you all for being here and for the work that you do to support families in Idaho every day. And now I'm going to turn it over to Denise. Denise will monitor the chat.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I was reading through those items that are nearby that bring you comfort, and all I can say is I have my tea, my hot tea, and my emotional support water bottle. So yeah, that's awesome. So yes, it's kind of a cold, I say cold, it's really muggy, but it's still kind of a cool, rainy day here in Missouri. I'm in the southwestern corner of Missouri, so we've just moved from Tennessee last year, so it's still getting used to the muggy again. Um, where we used to live, it was muggy there, but not quite the same kind of muggy. I don't know if it gets the same kind of muggy up there in Idaho, but It's definitely a mug for sure. So, but it was interesting. I think, Annika, I think you're the one that mentioned that there's a good representation from home visiting today. And you'd said, I think there was a parent educator as well. So it's kind of nice. It's we just finished up a grant with parent educators from across Missouri that work with parents as teachers. So it's kind of nice that to see all of the spaces and states that they are representing. So very nice. But I appreciate you guys inviting me back in here. I will say that I've been in the classroom. I spent a few years, well, spent many years in a classroom. The first 10 of that was spent in the high school classroom, teaching family and consumer sciences and all the child development and parenting education classes, such as that. But then I moved from high school to an infant classroom. Literally, I stopped teaching and I started working in the infant classroom because that's where I wanted to be. And it was a very different world, 8 infants and 2 teachers. And that was really about the time that I started doing my deep dive into infant mental health and understanding what all it means. So it's been kind of interesting. And I know that when people hear the term infant mental health, a lot of times and I was the same. You think of therapists or clinicians, specialized services, but I mean, truly the reality is that infant and early childhood mental health, it's really a part of all of those everyday interactions that we have. It's that greeting a child at the door, um, comforting a child when mom and dad have dropped them off and there's that difficult separation. It's helping them to navigate those big emotions. I have a 2-year-old living in my house. Our oldest daughter and her husband have moved down from Washington State to live with us until they get their house built. And so I have a 2-year-old in the house again. And those are a lot of big emotions. And part of infant mental health is helping to navigate all of those big emotions. So really what we're just going to look at today is, how those infant mental health principles show up in classrooms and how supporting educators is one of the most important things that can be done to support our children. So again, we don't have to go through all of that. You guys can look at that. This is just kind of what we're going to be looking at today, as far as, looking at infant and early childhood mental health principles and how they're related, how we can recognize that impact and the importance of that impact of educator well-being. And then looking at strategies to support that co-regulation, because that piece is huge. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago, and it's a big part of what children need from us and what we need for ourselves. So really just take a quick moment. I want you to think about all of those kids that you've ever interacted with, that one who has really stuck in your mind, who's stayed with you, who you think about even when they're not right there in that space with you. Just take a moment. What made that child memorable to you? What emotions came up when you think about that child? And then, what did they need from you? And just sit for a moment and think.
Denise, are we supposed to be seeing slides?
Oh, well, maybe if I shared my screen. So yes, let's try that one instead. Okay, thank you for that, Annika. Hang tight, guys. I will get us there. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, well, there we go. Are you seeing that now? Okay. Thank you for catching that. I'd have just gone on like I had good sense. Okay, so in any case, go ahead and think about those kids, that maybe that one particular child that you had or that you have been in space with that has really, made some emotions in you, stirred up some of those things. So what about them stuck with you? And as far as being in the classroom, many educators will think of children who are struggling. I mean, that's pretty natural. Um, you say their names a lot, that tends to stick, or you might think of someone who is a child who is just amazingly happy and joyful. Or you might think of that child that really challenged you, because there are kids that will challenge you, right? So in any case, all of that just reminds us that the work that we do is relational. Children affect us emotionally because relationships matter. And that emotional connection is not a distraction. It really is the teaching. It doesn't distract from the teaching. It is the teaching. So what is infant and early childhood mental health? So this on the screen, see, I can show you the screen now. On the screen is the 0 to 3 definition of infant and early childhood mental health. And when we look at that, it's the developing capacity of a young child from about 0 to 5 to really do those 3 big things: to form close and secure relationships, to experience and express emotion, and to explore and learn, right? But when we really dive into what that is, so developing capacity, right? It's a reminder that those first 3 years of life, there is extraordinarily rapid growth and change in children. So that term, developing capacity, reminds us that they're going to continue to grow and change. That to form those close and secure relationships, because we know that it is through close, secure interpersonal relationships with parents and caregivers that are important in those children's life, that infants and toddlers are going to learn what people can are expecting of them, and what they can expect of people, right? And we know that infants and toddlers depend very heavily on adults to help them to experience and regulate and express emotions in ways that are appropriate for their age, for their location at that time. So, and then that drive to explore and to master your environment is inborn in humans. It's ingrained in ourselves, in our DNA. Infants and toddlers' active participation in their own learning and development is an important aspect of their own mental health. So all of those things are pieces that really come together, and all of it is within the context of family and community, because that's where infants and toddlers are going to be learning. They learn to share and to communicate all of those feelings, the big feelings, and all of their experiences, and a developing sense of themselves. They find that as a competent and effective and valued individuals. So, and that's very important when it comes to thinking about infant mental health. And of course, culture influences every aspect of human development. So, including how infant mental health is understood, how the goals and expectations for a child's development is used by parents and caregivers. So all of that to say that it's because infant and early childhood mental health is not simply the absence of problems. It really is the essence of what we are. It's building through relationships. It's interacting with children by caring adults that understand, what to help them to understand themselves and how their world works around them. So, and I find this to be very true. Many educators truly do underestimate the importance of their role. They really do. Um, the work that is done in a classroom with children is infant mental health work. It's not more, it truly is infant mental health work. It's embedded truly within every aspect of what they are doing, whether it is sitting with kids at the table and interacting while they eat, whether it is during diaper changes or, caring for a child that is laying down for a nap. All of those things, every piece that is occurring within the classroom is full of those infant mental health principles. And the challenge really is to recognize the significance of those moments and helping to ensure that educators themselves have adequate support. Because all the things that we do in that classroom is infant mental health work. So, research consistently shows that relationships are the foundation of learning, right? We are aware of this. And before children can really fully engage in academics, they have to feel safe enough to explore. And it's that being safe to explore and learn that is part of the definition of infant mental health. And a child who trusts their teacher can borrow those moments of regulation from them, because we have to, before a child can regulate themselves, they literally borrow the calm from their caregiver or their parent. So a child who can trust in a teacher can borrow regulation, moments of regulation and confidence and calm from that relationships. So relationships truly are the curriculum that is being done in a classroom. So when we look at that, relationships create things like safety and trust. They create curiosity, because curiosity is what allows our children to go out and explore, right? And confidence and those learning readiness, it creates those moments of learning readiness, because when that trust is there and it's fully established, then that child can go out and learn and grow. Again, it's fully the definition of infant mental health. Okay, so when we're looking at in the classroom, and we've talked quite a bit about the parallel process, and what kids need from educators. So that little list right there of what children need from educators, and educators need these too, right? The way adults are treated affects how they can show up for children. So when you have an educator in the classroom who's supported, say, by a director, when they feel supported, when they feel like they can trust that relationship, that educator can then provide the same thing, that same environment for the children in her classroom. If we want educators to provide calm, responsive care, then we have to ensure that they experience those same qualities from supervisors, directors, colleagues, and organizations that they work with. So it truly does flow down through the system. And we've talked about that parallel process, and how if we want somebody to be able to show up for families and for children, then somebody has to be showing up for them, right? And that's part of the reason that we find so much success in places and spaces that lean heavily into things like reflective supervision. Because what that reflective supervision provides for that person will then translate down to families and to children. Wow. The emotional labor of teaching. There really is. There is a lot of work, a lot of emotional pull, emotional labor that comes with being in the classroom. And I think home visitors experience this very similarly. There's a lot of things that an educator in the classroom holds the same way that home visiting holds, the same way that early intervention holds, same way that even clinicians hold. But there's a lot there. There's the stresses of the family. There's the stresses of just children in the classroom, those behavioral challenges. There's all the paperwork and the documentation that goes into just the job itself. Staffing shortages. That's a huge one in this field in particular. Staffing shortages, and not only that, those staffing shortages also then impact there's a word, and now I'm not even finding the word, but the legal and liability aspects of childcare and being in that classroom. So there's so many things that are felt and held by educators that it can be incredibly tiring and draining. There's a huge reality piece that we don't often see. In fact, when I mentioned I used to be in the classroom, when I actually switched from teaching high school, because I was there, to moving into the infant classroom, I had my master's in early childhood special education. And, I just wanted I wanted some experience in the classroom. And I was with the babies, again, 0 to about 12 months old, because that's where I love. That's my favorite place to be. And I wanted to have that experience and understanding. So I spent a few years there. But when I did that, when I made that big switch from teaching in a high school classroom to working at a child development center in the infant classroom, people would ask why I quit a real job to babysit. People would ask, why I was wasting my education playing all day. They would ask some of the dumbest questions ever. And it upset me. It bore into my soul because I knew that I was doing really important work. I was doing work that mattered, that impacted lives from the very beginning. And people didn't really get that. And that's actually when I did my deep dive into infant mental health and what it was. And I talked to people, I learned about it. I found the association, because this was in Oklahoma, so I found the association there, and that's where I earned my first endorsement, because I needed people to understand that what I was doing mattered, and I wanted that credibility behind my name. I wanted that recognition. So there truly is this field is very much unseen. This field is very much unacknowledged even. People don't see it as a real job. They don't see that it matters, and that's sad because we know that it does. We know that it truly impacts families, impacts children. So it is it's definitely not one that's entered into for the money. We'll be honest about that. But it's one that is entered into because it matters, because people that are there generally are there because that's where they want to be. But it definitely is unseen a lot. So stress in children can look like things like clinginess and aggression. It can look like being withdrawing from, friends and people that matter. It can look like tantrums, right? We see that. We see those things show up in little ones a lot. They don't look a whole lot different in adults. When stress shows up, it looks like irritability or fatigue, emotional numbness. Nothing really bothers us anymore. Lack of patience. Yeah, you just aren't as patient as you used to be, right? Or just being completely overwhelmed. Stress affects everyone. Children and adults both communicate their stress through behavior, just kind of different behaviors. And we understand that behavior is communication, and most of us get that for children, right? Every behavior has meaning. So they're trying to say something, but what are they trying to say? Well, it's the same for adults. Behavior has meaning. What is trying to be communicated? And when we stop looking at it as something that is bad or they shouldn't be doing that, when we stop looking at behavior, even of adults, from that point of stance of judgment and look at it from that point of curiosity, we really can start to understand a little bit more about what is happening in that person's life. So really, behavior has meaning for children and adults. And sometimes we forget to think about that. We really do. We forget that, I think for adults, I think we tend to look at it as good or bad and not so much as having that meaning behind it. And I will be honest, when I get stressed, I don't get pleasant. I really don't. My husband can attest to that. So again, moving from judgment to curiosity. But, looking at that behavior has meaning, instead of what's wrong with this child? Why are they doing this? Slowing down, right? Taking those breaths, doing some mindfulness, right? What is this child trying to teach me or trying to tell me? And that is one of the things that we need to be aware. That really is where some of those mindful self-regulation practices come in, sometimes in those hard moments. So behavior tells us about needs. And when we become curious, our responses become more effective and more compassionate. So mindful self-regulation, things like slowing down and taking a nice deep breath, or doing some imagery and visualizing, or maybe even doing some just stepping outside and stretching and doing some things that truly bring us into the moment, and doing some grounding exercises. There's a lot of ways we can do some of that, but really behavior tells us about needs. For adults, for kids, slowing down can help us to be a more compassionate person, to be more effective in those interactions. So that's one of the quotes that I really work to remember, because I think we all should really slow down and remember that. A child learns to self-regulate by borrowing your calm, not by sitting alone with their overwhelm. So adult regulation is going to lead to better child regulation, and child regulation is going to lead to better learning and engagement. They don't learn how to regulate in isolation, right? A child cannot learn to calm down by being told to calm down. So neither can adults, right? Adults don't do that either. But kids will learn to regulate with repeated experiences from calm, supportive adults. That's how it's going to be. And when we regulate ourselves, again, taking those breaths, doing some grounding, stretching out, rolling those shoulders, making sure that you notice those areas of tension, you're going to actually create situations and conditions that children can learn to regulate themselves. But it does not happen in isolation. So and I know too many classrooms that do that. I know too many classes, even early elementary, that instead of helping a child to regulate, they'll send them out to the hallway or send them to the principal's office because they don't want to deal with it. So, but kids are not going to learn to regulate in isolation. So, but who supports the educator? So when things become difficult, who's supporting the educator? Or, who helps you regulate? You have a classroom and 8 babies, 2 teachers, 8 babies under the age of 1. There are occasions when the whole classroom is crying at once. 3 of them need a diaper change, 4 of them need to eat, all of them need a nap. Ooh, it can get hairy. Ooh, it can get really, really challenging. Um, who's there to help you regulate? Who helps you to reflect and just kind of look back and think about it? Who helps you to feel seen? So educators need all of these things, just like a child needs these things. But think about it. Who helps you in moments like this, whether you're in a home visit, whether you're in the classroom, who helps you to regulate? Who helps when things become difficult? I think there are a lot of educators who realize that they spend significant amount of energy supporting others, but have very few spaces where they themselves actually feel supported. Um, so just take a minute and think in your world, whether you're in the classroom, you're in the home, wherever you are doing the work, who helps you with these things? Do you have somebody that helps you with these things? Maybe, maybe not, right? Maybe you have help with a couple of things, not all of them, right? It can be really hard. It can be very challenging. And when we look through and really think about where do I have that support? Why do I not have that support? I think that it can really become very eye-opening. So just kind of give that some thought. Oops. All right, so looking at those protective factors, and just as kids have protective factors, adults do as well. Supportive relationships, in fact, are really among the strongest predictors of resilience for children and adults. So supportive relationships is huge. And when we think about that, whether it is maybe you have a supervisor who is incredible, maybe they are your protective factor as far as that support that you need. Maybe you have a coworker who stands strong by you, who's there to lend you their ear, to really lend you that shoulder to cry on occasionally. But what does that look like for you? But other protective factors, things like reflective supervision. Again, we know because research shows that when a person is receiving reflective supervision, that translates down to the family and children that they serve. Children's, families, and children that they serve. So if a home visitor is receiving reflective supervision and they feel supported and they have that to lean into for those times of big feelings of their own, then they are going to be able to provide that same kind of a space or that same being able to talk and to lean into those things to those families that they serve. Where then those families, it translates down to their children. They're going to be a little bit more compassionate. They're going to slow down to wonder more than react. So when we receive reflective supervision, it truly translates down to the children and the families that you serve. Peer connection. Again, that is a huge one. How many of you have a connection with someone that you work with, a colleague, somebody that is maybe not even in your world of work, but a friend that you can lean into and just talk? How many of you receive opportunities for professional growth? Well, anybody who's here is obviously receiving opportunities. But even beyond this space, do you have an opportunity to seek out additional learning experiences? Because that, again, those are protective factors for adults in education in other realms. For recognition. Again, that is why I sought out endorsement, because I felt undervalued. I felt very unseen, really. I felt that people did not see the world that I was in as important. So I needed that recognition. So that was part of the reason I looked at endorsement. Realistic expectations. I think that could be a whole conversation on its own, but to have those realistic, and again, realistic, we all have expectations for ourselves. Some of them are not very realistic, right? They don't take into account and factor in other people, because other people actually have, when they come into our world, it can shift things incredibly. And it makes things that we have plans or that we have ideas on to be very unrealistic. So when we're looking at protective factors, we want to make sure that some of these are in our world, because they are important. It is important that we have these. If we didn't have any of these, there's no way that we would get the job done. We might get it done for a few days, we might get it done for a few months, but it will lead to burnout very quickly. So being able to lean into some or hopefully all of these protective factors helps to keep people in the job, helps to keep them in the job in a way that is very satisfactory. And we need people to stay in the job. My goodness. I am sure that Idaho is in this very similar or same boat that Missouri is in as far as educators in the classroom. They're few and far between. We have wait lists for every class all around. We have a childcare desert here in Missouri. So I would imagine that it's very similar or the same for you. We need people to step up and do this kind of work, but we have to ensure that they are able to do this long term, right? Because this is hard work. Again, it's undervalued work. So we need to make sure that we can put some of these protective factors in place to ensure that they can do that. So everyday mental health practices. Again, infant mental health is not about grandiose interventions, right? It's just those normal, everyday, small relational moments that build up over time. They do, they accumulate. It can be very simple things like greeting that child with a hug, just showing them that with that smile, how glad you are that they are there. Teaching children to name feelings. That's a big one. And I don't think that, in fact, I'm pretty sure there are some adults alive today that they really struggle with even identifying their own feelings and knowing what to do with them, knowing how to express their own feelings appropriately, right? So when we start young, we have really good start that we will grow adults who can do that. So making sure that you are there to help with that repair after conflict, whether it's between children or between you and a child, because that breaks can occur between an adult who cares about a child and a child, and making sure that you are willing and able to step into that place of repair with a child. Following a child's lead. They are so important in our world. Why would we not want to just let them experience being that lead at a time or two, right? Giving them the opportunity to say, yeah, I'm going to invite you into my world. I would like for you to come into my world and be a part of it. And we can step in and do that. We always expect children to be a part of our world. And it's not even that we invite them in, we just expect them to. But giving them that lead and letting them invite us into their play is huge. And maintaining those predictable routines. That's why those schedules are there. And I will say that 2-year-old in my house now, he has a very, very predictable routine. We don't mess with that, mainly because our sanity depends on it. And in a classroom, when you have 12 2-year-olds, sanity depends on routine. Children thrive and grow when they know what's happening in their world, right? I think everybody does. When we know that even as adults, think about as a school calendar. Okay, well, we're in school from, September through May, and we know that these months and this is happening here and here and here. Routine is comforting. Routine brings comfort to children. They know what they can count on. Our family is foster family for several years when we were living in Oklahoma, and routine is what saved a lot of us, a lot of our sanity. Our children, when they come from when they're pulled out of a place, whether it was a good place or a bad place or whatever, when they were pulled out of a place and basically just thrust into our place, having that routine gave them something to lean into. It gave them something to know so that they could depend on. Even if it was just that bath time is at this time, followed by a book, followed by bed. Having that kind of a predictability gave them security. So all of those little moments build up over time. So, okay, let's just look at this. This is just kind of let's consider a child that arrives upset every morning and cries for about 20 minutes after drop off. Think about this. What do you think this child needs? How would looking at what this child needs from an infant mental health lens actually help to guide your response? And I'm just curious, and this is a small group, so if you want to jump off of and just unmute, you can do that. You can put it in the chat, but what do you think this child is needing? So every day you come in, and I will say, this is based off of my own experience, this little discussion piece, because it happened. What would this child need? So they've been dropped off and they do nothing but cry for 15, 20 minutes. What do you think they need? Thoughts? Mm-hmm. Just be overtired, overly tired, need some time to settle, a mini nap, and that's a possibility. Definitely. Definitely. So some of that extra comfort even. Yeah. Anything else?
That I wish I had the ability to fall through crappy windows.
I think somebody's talking, but I'm not sure. So, um, when you're thinking about and of course it could vary. So, like Crawford said, that maybe some extra calm down time, maybe even a small nap, something that could bring that comfort. Um, Maybe it's just that they need some extra co-regulation strategies. Maybe they need to have some discussion with the parents. What's happening that, maybe the parent is always running late. So that really cuts down on that drop-off time goodbye. Maybe having some discussion like that. There's a lot of different things, but when you look at it from that child's point of view, when you look at it from the idea of infant mental health and connections, you're going to really start focusing and understanding um, rather than trying to fix things. You're going to be more curiosity. You're going to be more curious than you are going to say, well, got to do this and this and this. So you're going to respond with curiosity. So there's a lot of opportunity when we experience challenges in the classroom like that. Um, so when we look at it from that lens of infant mental health, it gives us a better understanding of um, what might be happening. So again, curiosity first. Okay, so reflective practice as one of those protective factors, even. Reflective practice helps us to slow down and to make meaning from those experiences. It's not about evaluating performance, it's about understanding relationships. Um, Reflection asks things like, what happened? How did I feel? What about the baby? What was that child experiencing? What could I do different and try differently next time? Again, it's not about fixing, it's about wondering and being curious. Reflective practice helps us to do that. It helps us to slow down and to be more curious. With kids, you've got to be curious. That strengths-based lens, it creates hope. When we approach things from a strengths-based lens, instead of what's difficult about this child? Well, a lot. Instead of that, looking at it from that, it asks things like, what strengths do I see? What's working? What can I build on? It helps educators really recognize the resilience of children and families and even of themselves. So when we look at it come from that strengths-based lens instead of that deficit lens of what is wrong with this kid, or why won't this family ever do anything, or why can't I fix this? All of those are very much a deficit look at things. But when we look at it from that strengths-based approach, we're going to be able to think about what can I build on? Okay, so this is working. I see that this little piece is working. What else can we build on? So again, you're looking at it from a positive lens instead of that negative lens. Supporting ourselves in the work, woohoo! Because self-care is often framed as something that's outside of work. You do that later. You can take care of yourself at home. But there are a lot of really effective regulation strategies that can be done throughout the day, right? Small moments matter. Just pausing and breathing. And I will say I do that a lot. In between meetings, because sometimes it's just back-to-back meetings. Sometimes you get grouchy people in meetings, because we all do. Whether you may have grouchy families, you may have grouchy kids. You need to be able to pause and to slow down and breathe. And those things, it does not have to take much time, but it is enough that it can regulate yourself And again, when you're regulated and you go into some, to work with a family or a child who is very dysregulated, you have a better chance of helping them to regulate. Because if you go in dysregulated, they're dysregulated, nobody's going to be regulated.